Hi, welcome to this edition of the CTQ Smart Levers. And Ramaran, today we're going to talk about something very interesting. We want to talk about this concept called spaced repetition. So, what is this all about?
So the journey or the story of spaced repetition, it starts with the brain in all of our heads. And the brain is not always this powerful machine that we think it to be because it's often lazy and forgetful. It doesn't want to do a lot of work. So our brain does not like remembering things unless there is a very strong reason to. So we should think of the brain as a sieve and not a safe. So as soon as we encounter something new, it's almost guaranteed we will start forgetting it. So there are some reasons when the brain kicks into gear when it encounters something new. It could be a very strong emotional association. If you had a lion jumping out behind me right now, you would never forget that moment. Or it could be something that is connected to something you're already interested in. But in most cases, if you're an up leveler, a curious person, you will encounter things that you will start forgetting very rapidly. Spaced repetition, you can think of it as interval training for learning. And in spaced repetition, the idea is to recall something that you have learned very recently, very soon after you first encounter it. It could be a matter of minutes. So if I'm teaching you to multiply two large numbers, you might somewhat remember it, but chances are you will start forgetting it. So let me schedule a reminder where you can learn what 12 into 13 is in a matter of minutes. And if I find that you cannot recall it easily, then I'll schedule another encounter very soon, not too far off. But once you start remembering, I'm going to say, fine, I'm going to test you on this tomorrow, and then maybe a week later, and so on. So spaced repetition is all about repeating so that you can remember, learn something. And the spacing is something that you do to ensure that as soon as things start to decay, you bump it up again.
So, you're proposing something called as slit smart levers interval training, is it? How and where have we used the concept of spaced repetition in our work, Ramaran?
Any kind of learning situation can directly benefit from spaced repetition. So there are apps for it, there are a lot of approaches to it. Now, we don't necessarily have our own standard courses or interventions that are very standardized. So we use the concept of spaced repetition in a different way by focusing on the fact that yes, people will forget new things that we tell them, and part of our job description is to bring in new ideas into companies and into the lives of people. So we are fairly sure that they may enjoy the process of encountering that new information, but they will start to forget it. And so what we've often done is to ensure that during subsequent touch points and interventions, we bring in concepts from past cases, past interactions, so that there is always that repeatability that comes in front of people. You can't say that we've used it in the technical form of the spaced repetition, but whenever we get a chance, we bring back older memories. And that's why we've also ensured that many of our assignments are not one-offs, because we know they don't work. We don't like these one-off workshops very much because honestly, there is no habit around it, there is no repetition around it. And so to sustain a new idea, you really need to focus on the repetition part of it. And that is something we're very conscious about it. But I actually wanted to come to you, because we have used repetition in this, in the field of culture building. So can you tell us how?
One thing that we have used repetition and not probably spaced repetition, like you said, in the technical sense of the term, but repetition is in the idea of a repository of stories. Having these stories of people actually living the organization's values and making sure those stories are surfacing from time to time across different channels. It could be on an email newsletter, it could be a Slack or a Microsoft Teams channel, and how, say, managers are talking about these stories, leaders are referring to some of these stories in their all hands calls. I think those are great ways of ensuring that the message is being repeated. In fact, at one of our clients where we actually delivered this repository of stories, I just did a smartcast recording with him recently, and he was talking about how they are very particular about repeating the organization's values in everything that we do, from a client presentation to any meeting that they start. The first thing that they talk about is the organization's values. So, yeah, repetition at work is probably the best way of ensuring whatever you want stays top of mind, right?
Yeah, and just to add to it, we have often drawn the parallels from fields like religion and B2C marketing. And a lot of it just depends on repetition, right? If it's easy to repeat or if you encounter it multiple times, you can make a lot of messages stick. So, this is connecting back to our Made to Stick episode. And also, there are a lot of other studies that show how in communication, repetition is an extremely important factor.
So, what are people missing out on by not knowing and applying the concept of spaced repetition in their work?
You miss not being able to remember key ideas at the time when you actually need it. So we can probably call this something like what happens to Karna in the Mahabharata, that there the idea is that he forgets at the right moment something that he should have applied. So if you've built a habit as an upleveler or as a curious person to encounter new information, you've taken notes around it, or you've just said, okay, fine, I'll maybe remember this. This will sit in the back of my mind somewhere. But there are certain kinds of these notes that or concepts that you want are going to be life changing, and you want to be able to use this at appropriate moments, whether on the battlefield or whether in peacetime. And if you do not encounter these ideas regularly enough, you are guaranteed to forget it. We don't want that to happen to ourselves, because it defeats what you've done so far. So even an episode like this, when we record, we are forced to recall something that we have learned about a concept like spaced repetition. Where have we applied it? And it acts as a sort of a reinforcement of all the work that we have done so far, so that when Harish asks me a question like this, I will be able to come up with the right answer.
Oh, Raman, you're letting out the secret of why we are doing this series. And final question, why do you consider spaced repetition is such an important part of an upleveler's toolkit?
Right. It all comes back to having that deliberate system. Like I said, spaced repetition will give you the ability to consume new information and make it into that trusted part of your toolkit. Otherwise, I can think of it as a blade that is going to get rusty if you don't use it. So, spaced repetition actually very mindfully makes you recall concepts and apply them. And there is a lot of interesting case studies about how people have learned everything from quantum computing to other kinds of concepts. So if you're trying to be future relevant, you're going to learn new information, try to teach yourself new things. And you will find that spaced repetition can be used both as a tactical tool to remember something, but also as a strategic tool of influence while you try to build your future relevance.
All right, I think that is a nice explanation of the concept and why it is so important for all of us. Thanks a lot, Ramanan.
Thank you.